the Worldwide Podcast. I'm your host, Miles Irving, and I'm going to jump straight into discussing the conversation that we've got this week with Thomas Laursen. Because actually, we've had some internal discussion between myself and Joel, who is the podcast editor. And by the way, we probably should just get Joel talking on the podcast sometime, because he's not just a technical man. He's very much with the heart of what this podcast is about. Joel and I talk back and forth, and he's an integral part of what's happening. And really, we need to let you hear his voice sometime. By the way, though, you can hear Joel's voice in written form if you go onto the blog posts on the Forager website. There are some wonderful things that Joel has written there. But anyway, to get back to how we discussed this conversation, or the conversation about the conversation, which I think is an interesting reflexive exercise. Joel was a bit concerned that the tone is quite negative, to do with the restaurants and the commercial side of the foraging that I've been doing, and also to do with the teaching of foraging that sometimes doesn't always have the kind of immediately transformative effect that I might hope for, and essentially I guess I have been almost kind of lamenting, which is a sanctified way of saying moaning, but and grumbling, but I think sometimes the lament, when your foot hurts, you kind of say ow, and I am at the moment very discomforted about the possibility that things which seem to be motivated well end up just being a part of the problem. And basically, I suppose, in essence, the critique of things as they are, what do you call it, capitalism, neoliberalism, or even the critique as we're entering into by putting up foraging and wild food against domestication and agriculture, which goes a lot further back than the idea of neoliberalism, is basically that the critique of that paradigm is that we could be just eating the good of the land and basically trusting a sense of benign provision that comes from landscapes, and recognizing that was the way of life of our ancestors, or people still living within that hunter-gatherer way of life now, which is basically, it's a matter of trusting that the landscape is providing for you, viewing the land as almost like, or actually as a benign person, a sense that it's like a mother or another kind person taking care of you, but then the sense of your own participation in that means that there's a reciprocity, a giving and receiving. But basically, the industrial paradigm, the agricultural, capitalist, neoliberal, however you want to look at it, all of those things are basically another approach, which means that we earn our bread by the sweat of our brow. So we're pushing, we're trying, we want to make things happen, and we're seeing the world outside of us almost like a problem that needs fixing, that we've got to somehow make the world give us what we need, because we don't trust that benign provision. And so basically we're moving into a situation of control and effort and pushing. So my issue is, and what comes up with Thomas here is that I'm just questioning whether the initial intention of getting out into the wild and foraging and showing people, whether that's us commercially foraging or us teaching people, where as soon as it becomes caught up within that capitalist system, there's a danger that it's actually being co-opted in the same way, like as the Who sang in their great song, "Won't get fooled again, meet the new boss, same as the old boss," and I'm seeing that in what I discussed with restaurants, that it just becomes a marketing tool for the restaurant to use wild foods. And then that the almost sacred act of taking somebody out into the wild and showing them wild plants becomes a form of entertainment, which doesn't do what you set out to do, i.e., really create a link between those people and their own landscapes. It just sort of amuses, and I'm afraid the chat with Thomas is a bit kind of shop talk. That's the other thing that Joel raised. But I guess we've just decided, well, maybe it is a bit negative, but we're going to let it go out, and just so it's for real. These are the conversations that I'm actually having, and there it is, kind of in the raw. Okay, well, we'll get on and introduce Thomas now, although the way we've decided to go with this is he'll basically introduce himself. But just to say, I met Thomas at one of the MAD symposiums a few years ago, and we just spent hours and hours and hours chatting. Yeah, and I've been out to see Thomas in Denmark, spent time foraging with him there, and also he's been across to see us, which we talk about. And the great thing about Thomas is it's interesting to be talking to him the week after we had John Callis on there with the emphasis on education and being an educator, because Thomas has actually trained in the area of educating kids, teaching kids, and that's been an important part of his work in the last few years, to bring the foraging element into that, which I think is, it's really interesting, and it means that he's touching all of these bases. He's interacting with the chefing world. He's broadcasting stuff on telly, but he's also down on the ground just doing basic wild food education with kids, which I think is just fantastic. So okay, let's get on to the conversation with Thomas. So I'm delighted to welcome Thomas Laursen to the World Wild podcast. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Miles.
Well, it's good to have you here, and we were just discussing the fact that you would probably do a better introduction to yourself than I can. So let's start out by you telling everybody who you are and what you do. And
well, yeah, maybe I can. Well, I'll try not to get caught up in old memories and no. Well, I'm Thomas Laursen.
Old memories are good. That's fine.
Yeah. I'm Thomas Laursen, and I do foraging for a living in Denmark. I started out way back as a child with mushrooms and a bit from the sea and that. And then, to cut it a little bit short, I introduced the orange carpenter ant to Noma back in almost 10 years ago. Mm. And that kind of changed my life, because I suddenly saw that I could make a living out of being in nature and providing wild food for restaurants. And
so you were the ant seller. You were the original ant seller to Noma.
I'm the actual ant man.
The ant man.
Yeah, I can lift 50 times my own weight as the ants. No, I can't. I did that. So I think I just grew up thinking about food. I like anything if it's not poisonous and it's not shit. It's food potentially. So I've been thinking like that. And what has happened in Denmark with the whole new Nordic revolution and Noma and everything, that was just my time, and it's still my time. So I'm having a blast providing for restaurants. I have written 2 books within the last 3 years. I've done podcasts in Danish. I've done a lot of TV. I've done tons of walks and talks, and I've been involved in a few different projects. Amongst them is the Vild Mad project that came out of the organization MAD, related to Noma. I do so many things now. I've made a few bottles of gin, and I'm working on developing some wild kombucha with the company. And I've been representing Denmark abroad, and I traveled a lot. I visited you a few years back, and
yeah, you did.
And I think actually maybe you should look at us doing this podcast together now. Is I don't know. I'm kind of a fan, but I feel like equal, but a fan. You kind of opened up this world. I would say that if you hadn't done what you've done, I might have had a different life. So I'm quite grateful for what you've done.
Oh, wow. You got stopped at the airport on the way out after you visited us, didn't you?
Yeah, that's because I don't know. I'm a forager, so I carry a knife now and then, and I can't remember. I think it was. I put it in my checked-in luggage, but then I think it was raining or something, so I pulled out a jacket from the bag and brought it. And then apparently my knife was in that jacket. It was
quite a big knife, wasn't it?
Nah, it wasn't that big. It wasn't. I don't think I could hijack a plane with it. But anyway, 2 solid guys took me aside, bringing machine guns, and brought me into a small room and left me there for a while. Had a serious chat with me, took the knife, and they let me go back to Denmark. Actually, that has happened quite a few times. Not quite a few, at least 3. I brought knives, not deliberately, but it just happened because I have knives in bags and in jackets and in pockets everywhere, because I tend to lose knives. I'm not really good at taking care of my gear, so things disappear and then they reappear, and sometimes that's on airplanes.
Yeah, the same thing's happened to me. I must say, quite a few times I've had a knife in a place where I shouldn't be, like going into a courtroom, for example.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've usually got one I just usually carry a knife, because you never know when you're going to find something. I try and carry a knife and a small bag or something. Just you know, if you find something you didn't expect to find, you want to be able to cut it properly. And
I do.
I guess it's kind of weird, isn't it? We have this benign intent to forage.
I think it's it's definitely so much in my DNA. I'm literally talking to you, looking out the window, even though I've looked out that window so many times before. I'm always I don't know if it's a hunt, but I'm always aware and I'm always looking for something. I'm always thinking about the next meal that I'm going to make. So to me, it's all food, and it's about making delicious food. And so that's what I'm thinking about all the time when I'm out there looking. And I do it on the highway. I do it sitting in a train. I do it wherever I am. And I mean, I have this hashtag that I use, which is wild food is everywhere. Yeah. And literally wild food is everywhere.
Yeah. So I mean, you're saying about that it's what you're thinking about all the time, but I think that it's also what you're not thinking about all the time. Yeah, I'll explain what I mean. Like it's things catching our attention even in our peripheral vision, isn't it? You get to the point where you're so geared up for noticing stuff in the environment that you're not even consciously looking. Do you know what I mean? I think that's one of the interesting things about it, that you once you start on this journey of recognizing and gathering the plants, it's almost like your brain never switches off again. That you're constantly scanning when your eyes are open. You're constantly scanning for.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, there's no turn off button. It's there all the time. And even that. I mean, sitting here looking out the window, but it's also the knowing, the reference of having being like an active scanner of wild nature for years. Then I think about last season, and I think about what might be out there at this time of year. It's like early September. We've had a sep like flush, and now maybe there's another one coming, because right now it's raining. Is that enough rain? So I'm thinking about the future. How will this affect a certain area that I know? How about the heat? How would that have consequences for this and that plant, or for the mushrooms? Or my mind is somewhere else all the time as well. So I'm here, but I'm also thinking about all the delicious wild plants out there in this area. I'm not thinking about what's going on in Kent right now, because I have no sense of that, or in Greece or in Italy, but I have quite a good sense of what's going on here. And and even that sense, which is mine and it's inside me, but it's also being affected by all these social media, because I know other people and I know what they're doing, and they're showing me what they're doing. So I have so much knowledge. I don't even have time to sit here. Do you know what I mean? It's stressful. It's FOMO. It's like I have wild food FOMO almost year round. You too. You know what's going on in your area, and you know what's not. Where you know all the places where you're not right now.
Yeah, I'm going to potentially be the wise old uncle here, Thomas.
Okay, you can be that.
Well, it's just that I know exactly what you mean. Mm-hmm. The fear of missing out thing. I just feel like I'm kind of getting over it a little bit, just because of slight shift in objectives, I guess, or. So there's that thing when is enough is enough. When is enough enough? And I know I'm just the same as you. If I'm out picking seps or some other kind of mushroom, I I don't think there is any such thing as enough in terms of you just want to have that experience over and over again of finding that perfect step and bringing it home. And if you know there's a home for it in terms of you can store it or you've got customers that are wanting it, you'd think, okay, we'll just keep going with that.
Yeah.
Because it's just such a delight. And especially when you've got past the kind of objections that people are understandably raising about that sort of thing, saying, oh, aren't you doing damage? But the thing is, we know I guess I'm feeling a bit on the back foot, and that's why I'm saying this. I'm aware people are going to be listening to this and thinking, why do you want to keep taking more stuff? But the thing is, we're only taking the good mushrooms, which means the other ones are still there dropping the spores, and there's millions of spores, and there's plenty for the other wildlife, because we're not taking absolutely everything that's there, and we're leaving other stuff behind.
We're not hurting nature. We are. I mean, we've discussed this before, and I generally believe that it is more wrong not to be out there than to be out there and do what we do.
Absolutely.
I think that we are animals. You're an animal, I'm an animal, everyone out there listening, you're animals. And we should be clever animals, because we're quite a few by now, but we should go out there and take something. We should act like the animals, because we're kind of written out of the story, and we should be out there and taking some nettles and maybe even cutting them to the ground to make access for other plants to thrive and get some light. And because I meet, not so much anymore, but I still meet people saying, no, you can't, nature, don't touch it. It has to be wild. You cannot be out there. And being a human animal out there is wrong. And I just disagree. I think we should go out there. I think people do a lot of wrongs, but being a forager, going out there and taking some of it, that's not wrong. What would be wrong would be to go to a beach and to buy the root and take every little plant of beach mustard in June. That would be wrong. But waiting till July and August and taking 1/3 of each plant, taking it back, selling it to someone, or eating it, or sharing it, or whatever, distribute it, and just use it. That's not wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm just holding my thought that we started out on. So we've gone on a bit of a caveat there to just make sure everybody sees the perspective from which we're tucking in, as it were, to the wild bounty. But like in terms of this fear of missing out thing, the thing that my particular version of that in the last few years has been like all the big harvests that are out there, like when there's a big acorn yield, it's everywhere, and the cars are driving over them and people are walking over them. And the hawthorn berries are just pulsating out of the bushes. It seems like with there's just vitality and this offer. The bright red is saying, "Here am I, eat me." And the abundance of it is saying, "And eat a lot. I'm here." Yeah. And we go into the winter and they're still hanging there because we don't have a use for that many hawthorn berries. And that's the thing that bothers me is that there is this fecundity, this kind of, to me, like this gift which is being left on the plate to go cold and stale in a way. I mean, I know that's not true because it returns to the ground, but like this kind of cycling of nutrients which is all set up with the abundance of wild nature, that this stuff kind of comes bursting out of the ground, bursting out of the bushes and the trees, and it's supposed to be then picked up and redistributed. I mean, obviously, for the plants, that's part of that, is that they're expecting the acorn and the hawthorn berry to be moved somewhere else in order for a tree or a new tree or a bush to grow. But the sense that I have that this participation that we used to have in these cycles, that was so functional, it was so beneficial, that we participated in the life cycles of these plants. And the whole environment thrived. We thrived health-wise. To me, there's this sense of the need to tap into that abundance in order to almost right the wrong, to repair the breach between us and the land, which is why I personally feel, of all things, that's why it's the right thing to do to forage, because we are like the first we're like the sort of re-pioneers. I say re-pioneers because obviously this has all been done, but like we're sort of re-pioneering being part of the landscape. So you and I are kind of almost the first on the scene to start tinkering around to repair this kind of tear and sew it all back together. But seeing that kind of potential for all of those things to be used, and then seeing, for me, my role, I just think is to kind of initiate that just that sort of honourable and polite response to all of this superabundance, to say, yeah, thank you very much, we will make use of it, thanks for laying that on the table. We're now sit down and eat. And so every year I'm thinking, I still haven't cracked it with hawthorn berries, I still haven't cracked it with acorns. How could we find a way for this to be utilized and become part of human culture again? So that was my thing. I was getting bogged down every year with research we're doing. It's not reaching that point where we're actually solving it, and I'm thinking, I've got to do more with acorns. I've got to do more with, and then the next one comes, and I'm thinking, oh no, we haven't finished with hawthorn berries yet, and it's that was my kind of fear of missing out thing, that there's this opportunity each year to work with these things, and then it would be gone so soon. And also, even in the midst of it, I'd be thinking about the other one that's just come in. It means that, so I think it's the same thing as this brain scrambling thing of you know about this and you know about that and you know about the other. Where my kind of wise uncle advice is going to kick in here, Thomas. Mm-hmm. I just realized, well, hang on a minute, that oak tree doesn't behave like this. The oak tree is not sitting there going, oh no, it's going to be harvest time soon. Oh no, it just doesn't come into it.
No.
And what we're tapping into is to be more like a tree. Fundamentally, if we're foraging, we're going to be more like a tree. We're going to be more like a landscape. We're going to be more like a hill, a forest, an ocean. Do you know what I mean? That ultimately, and not even ultimately, sort of as soon as possible, please. I am kind of expecting that the fact that I'm engaging with landscapes, forests, mountains, etc., ought to have that effect on me, that I don't get caught up in the new rat race. It's called the foraging rat race. Do you know what I mean? This is ridiculous. For me to be sitting there getting stressed out about harvesting acorns. No, something's wrong here. So my advice to you, Thomas, is be more like a tree.
Thank you. Well, actually, I feel more, it's not FOMO. I'm 47. I'm not that young anymore. So I know there's going to be another year. The uncle is kind of taking over a little bit.
The uncle.
I think that. What?
Right. I'm looking forward. Come on, uncle. You tell me.
Yeah. But I think that. The way to. You think about. When you spoke about utilizing how to work with the hawthorn or with the acorns, I think that you and I think we're on the same team. If we win this battle, or whatever we would call it, that would be when people start doing it themselves, sort of taking us out of business or whatever. Like if everybody knew that would be the end goal, sort of, right? There's no need for you and me because people know, right?
Yeah.
I think that the whole food system, the way that we distribute food, the way that we produce food as a global society is crazy. And I think that the one thing that you can reduce it to, which is the most crazy thing, is that the empathy has been completely lost, because there is such a great distance from people who produce food and people who consume food. Nobody knows where things comes from. They travel the world. They are produced in closed barns around the world and put in packages telling this glorified, beautiful story about old farming, but not a lot of people are actually doing it. And it actually takes a lot of effort to get to the real good produce. I think that in that sort of journey from, which is not, it's quite a short journey if you look upon the history of mankind, then it's like maybe just 100 years, or maybe even less, depending on how you look upon it. And in that time frame, we've lost the empathy for like more or less every living creature. Not you and me, and there are a lot of good people out there, but it's like it's a financially based system that's only about the yield and the amount of money and the competition. And to be honest, I don't want to be part of that. And I mean, I've even had like invitations to do something bigger, and people meet me and say, then you can make someone do what you do, and you can do something else, and you can be bigger and more. But to be honest, I'm not interested in that. I'm really enjoying my life. I do what I do. I'm very close to things. I know that every decision that I make in my business is good. And I try to encourage people to be, to have maybe not love, but some sort of care in whatever choices in how they get food. Because you can get food that's been produced in a better way. Foraging is going to be, a key for empathy and care in the way that we produce food. It's going to be a part of, for people, recreation or connecting to the land or whatever you would want to call it. I think it's something that we all need, but I think it's also going to help us actually understand the way that we produce food and how we should change that. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I think if people are having that active participation in just some small aspect of what they're eating, and that involves actually noticing and being involved with some part of the ecology around them.
People are confused. Like when you look upon nature, there's so many. The more you go in, the way it seems to me is like the more you get into big cities, the more concern and awareness about nature and food in every way.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. And the way that I see it these days, I think you can reduce how you look upon nature and how to philosophies of nature. I would say there's one which is like the farmers' way they look upon it, like and that's related to religion in history. That's like you here's the land, you can take it and do with it whatever you want. And the second one is a kind of a new one, and that's more like, that's a lot of food or land or nature people that are like, they look upon nature as a victim that we should help. So we should sow some flower seeds to help nature, to help the bees, as an example of that. Or we should work and make to rewild nature. And then there's like where I would take you in for that perspective, and that's like you and me, and we're more like, we're animals, we're part of it. We should be clever animals, we should be part of it. But listen, we don't need to make nature. You just step back, it'll happen. It takes time, but it will happen. If you leave a field, things will happen. You don't need to sow certain kind of flowers for the bees or a certain kind of, because it's so complex and we don't even understand it. So the best thing is just to step back.
Well, I would say the best thing is to genuinely participate. We've now got this thing that you've just described there, this conservation activity, where people are going out and acting on the world around them with a view to making, as you say, kind of making nature happen.
Yeah.
Whereas what any other species does is it occupies its ecological niche. So doing your bit for the environment, as people say, that's an English phrase. I don't know if it would ring any bells for you, but we have little things, don't use too many paper towels. Do your bit for the environment. And
we don't. I'm not sure we have the equivalent of that, but I understand.
It's kind of perhaps a peculiar English mindset behind it, But
I see the point. I see the finger, the pointing finger that sort of needs to be when you say that sentence. It's like a school teacher. Do your bit for.
Do your bit. Yeah, do your bit. Whereas it always makes me kind of just shake my head in disbelief, really, because the thing is, don't use too many paper towels, but at the same time you're still burning fossil fuels, you're still eating industrial food, you're still, and then somehow not using too many paper towels is going to
be the solution of the whole thing. Probably, yeah.
Do your bit to reduce our paper towel bill. But anyway, the thing that we do in order to in order for nature to happen is, as I say, is that we occupy our ecological niche. Every species has evolved to be a functioning part of an ecosystem. And that means, the ecosystem thrives because they're there.
Yeah.
And you get this concept that the ecologists have come up with called a keystone species.
Yeah.
That says a certain species that because they're there, everything really thrives. And it's obvious to me that we have occupied that role in the past.
Yeah.
If you, people listen to this podcast often say this several times, but I think it bears repeating anyway.
I've heard it before, yeah.
The biodiversity hotspots on the planet are all under indigenous land management and currently burning as we speak, thanks to the insane president of Brazil giving the go-ahead for people to just land grab and no need to indigenous people anymore, just set fire to their forest and they'll soon run away, and you can just move in with your cattle and so on. But like the indigenous land management paradigm is the one that we desperately need. And it's amazing to me that you've got things like the World Wild Fund for Nature, whose name we deliberately parody with the World Wild podcast, by the way. They're actually they're at odds with indigenous people in spite of their formal statements to say how they respect and blah blah blah. But in practice, they're in competition because if indigenous people manage the land, then we don't need to give our money to the World Wild Fund for Nature, and they won't have executives paid obscene amounts of money and all of that anymore. Because indigenous people do it for free, if we just support their land rights and let them get on with it. On the one hand, and on the other hand, in the developed West, we can start thinking, well, how can we become indigenous again? How can we participate in these landscapes? And I do think, Thomas, that there's a way forward, which Tor Nordstranders was mapping out the territory, I believe, when he gave that talk from wild to tame and back again at the first MAD symposium. That there is a way that we could use all of the capacity that we have now as advanced technological humans. We could be finding a way to occupy an ecological niche specific to there being 9 billion of us on the planet. I'm not saying that it's an ideal situation for us to face that challenge. Obviously, for 9 billion of us to live well on a planet where the ecology is thriving, that's a very challenging thing from where we're starting from now. And I think if we were to set out the ideal problem, we'd probably say, well, 1 billion, that would probably be kind of workable. But I think the fact that we're going to have 9 billion, we have to, unless we commit sort of the worst kind of treachery, which is willing our own species to have global catastrophe so that the population is reduced. I don't think anyone can seriously will that without, you've got to be slightly deranged to wish that your own species, gets
it's kind of a hard decision to make. How?
Who would do it? Maybe we'll just pick a straw and half the population commit suicide. I mean, how do we do that? So I think we've got to start with the thing of like, well, we have to try to work out how could 9 billion people live in an ecological niche. And this is where I come from. Why I say we have to go back to being hunters and gatherers, in a sense, Thomas, is that anything short of that is a complete disruption of the ecology of our planet. If we are using the current paradigm of agriculture to produce our food and industry to produce the rest of our stuff, we have no choice but to just to land grab from wild nature. And what we need to be doing at the moment is reverse the 10,000-year-old land grab. And that means everything's got to go back to the wild. So my question is, what would that look like? And then it's very interesting that you say it's the people in the cities are most concerned. I think that's really, really interesting because to me, our objective needs to be how to make a city as biodiverse as the Amazon rainforest. Yeah. How can we do that? An actual city full of people, full of buildings, full of streets. How can we do that?
I think I'm working with a lot of different people. I'm working with some architects as well, and I mean I think that these things are happening. I think you and I could. We could come up with a better plan for this quite quickly, but it takes a while for people to get adjusted to maybe the thought of no, we should not have cars and streets. Yeah, small streets, but then there'll have to be something else in between and part of it. And when I say that we should step back, I think it's stepping back from very hard agricultural use, and I also strongly believe that the perspective of hunters and gatherers should be the one that changes the perspective on agriculture. I think that's how I would put it, because if you think with the empathy that I think is a part of what we do, if you look upon agriculture with that perspective, you can't be a part of that, because you can be part of some of it. And I think maybe it's quite funny, but Denmark has been kind of a hotspot for foraging for a few years, because it's been so related to the gastronomic scene. But we're a small country, we're a farming country, but we have quite a few farmers that are really pushing forward to another way of farming that sort of leaves room inside the field or on the edges or on the roof or in the soil, wherever. For wild nature to thrive, being it plants or mushrooms or birds or insects, whatever. Accepting a lesser yield, accepting, small bites of bugs on the leaves, whatever, and the customers, and that would be the city people. They're ready for it. They can accept that. They don't need perfect food with. If you ask them the simple question, do you want me to use pesticides and have perfect leaves, or you want me not to and have maybe a few holes here and there? They'll say, that's not even a question. They'll say, bring me the holes. I don't mind.
Well, there's an interesting aside to be said there. At the first MAD symposium, there's this guy talking about plants and how they have a form of intelligence and how they respond to things. And one of the things he was saying was that a lot of the plant defenses are either flavor chemicals or bioactive compounds, so that when an insect attacks a plant, it then kicks in with more of these compounds. So in the case of something like watercress, when these little beetles come, I don't know if you get them there, but we get to a point where it's full of holes because of these tiny little beetles eating the leaves. But of course, that watercress is more tasty.
It is. I've never noticed that, and I've collected, tons of watercress. I need to look at the watercress is looking beautiful right now. I guess the beetle it comes in like maybe late June or July. Is that it? Yeah. You get it too. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. But at that time of year, the watercress is more the fibers, and it has smaller leaves, and of course it has flowers. It's just flowering.
It's around about the time it flowers, isn't it?
Yeah. But right now the watercress is very watery. It's huge and it's abundant. I get tons of it.
Yeah, you've got those fantastic stems.
Yeah, I use that a lot as well now. I think I got inspired by you to use that.
Yeah, I think we were using the stems, but we got especially inspired by the story of Noma sending back the leaves and using the stems just to make a point. They got stems from the quite stemmy watercress from the supplier, and they picked the leaves down and sent them back and said, yeah, we don't need this bit.
That's funny.
It's nice, that turning things on its head sort of.
Yeah. I want to tell you a story on a completely different note. Something I experienced and I think it's a story that says a lot about how I look upon myself, because I came into the scene of all this with a lot of the attention that you get as well from media, whatever. But I keep saying that, well, I can't tell whether I'm super modern or super old-fashioned. And 3 weeks ago, I was in Russia doing a dinner with a restaurant called Bjorn that are very inspired by what is happening in the Nordic countries. They use sort of the same ingredient. I kept talking to them about making like something more new Russian, taking that tradition and making it and skip the Nordic Scandinavian religion. But anyway, we were out foraging, doing some video things, being like modern Russian chefs, and me traveling from Denmark to Russia to do this thing. And while walking out there, suddenly we were foraging for some birch bullets, and there were a few ceps and girolles. And then I was talking and doing different things. And then in there between the trees, I suddenly saw a group of maybe 5, maybe 60, 70-year-old Russian women doing the exact same thing that we were doing. They were foraging for the same mushrooms, doing the same thing for food, probably enjoying it, probably it being in their bones. They've probably been doing that all their lives. And there we were, being the modern gastronomic orientated foragers and chefs, and then they were just living their lives. That's how I feel all the time. I do what I do from both perspectives. I do it because it's in my bones. I love it. I can't help it. I can't. It's not a choice. And then I also have this other thing which is more gastronomic or adventurous or modern and orientated for attention. Do you know what I mean?
Oriented for attention. What you mean to people?
I love doing it, but I just do it because I've been doing it from back in the days when it was not fashionable. It used to be. 20 years back, 15 years back, doing what we do was not fashionable in any way, and now it is. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I do, but I have concerns about that.
Yeah, I know. Tell me.
Yeah, I do wonder if it's all been a terrible mistake, sometimes.
Yeah, I know.
I don't really think that. I just think we've got to push it through to the genuine outcome that we might be looking for, because there's certainly a lot of not the genuine outcome happening. Basically, I just think, unfortunately, for me, the whole wild food thing has all of this potential towards getting back to just a better way, and it's a better way in terms of our own personal, human nutrition. It's a better way in terms of our relationship to the landscape. It's a better way in terms of, I'm fully persuaded, that the wild plants are a common good, Mm-hmm. So in the long run, if everybody gets into this, far from it being this kind of mad scramble and kind of conflict there, the potential is that we start talking to one another and managing common resources, and then the sort of recreation of culture, which is, I guess, what I'm talking about with that hawthorn and acorn dilemmas. Like, how do we recreate the culture, not just for how to use the stuff, but everybody getting out and gathering it at a certain time of year. All of those good things are where the fact that you can eat wild food, to me, is like a sign that you might stumble across in the wilderness, and it would be pointing in a certain direction. And the direction would be, make things better in all the ways that I've just tried to summarize. Yeah. But in fact, what's happened is, it's become a way to fit into the business plan of restaurants and other organizations, just to basically make more money.
Yeah.
And look, whilst I understand that a restaurant has to meet the bottom line and all those kind of things, I'm increasingly convinced that it is totally illegitimate to do what you do with financial profitability as the driving force, fundamentally. And my concern is that there's all sorts of people out there that are flirting with and even wearing a big badge or a big T-shirt or a big hat that says wild food. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you were to strip back the layers and say, well, what is actually driving what you do day after day, it would be the PR and the money, the prominence and the money, whether you can establish yourself as the wild food chef, the this, the that, the other, so that you will then get more bookings in your restaurant, or and I have to be careful. Like the same thing. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I'm trying to move now towards more public speaking and education. But if I'm not careful, I'm then trying to peddle myself instead of peddling the wild plants with a view to getting more bookings to make the money. And it's just, I think what we've got to accept is that we're in a toxic environment, and some people call it capitalism, some people call it neoliberalism. You could just call it the temptation to be selfish and greedy. But the fact is, when we see that in an ecosystem everything's working together for the good, and the only way that the whole thing thrives is if we keep that thing flowing. So we can't have this individualistic thing that says, I've got to look after number one. That is totally against the flow. The driving force has to be, how can we get back in to participation? So financial gain being the driving force of things is really toxic, and I'm really concerned at the moment that financial gain and PR in the chefing world has hijacked the whole foraging thing pretty much. I'm really pissed off about that, and I'm trying to work out, how do I make the right move without singling people out and accusing people that hey, you're doing that. How do we kind of get this thing back on track, basically?
I agree, and that this should be a concern. We talked about this before, but I still believe that the attention that all the restaurants get is something that you can work with and push forward to. I mean, I agree that it is a concern that when just solely money is the goal, then you'll get in trouble, and that's not going to be good. So, but I still think that, I mean, I've gained I think I've gained some sort of position within the last few years, and I take that very seriously. So I'd say I work more with maybe even like the top chefs, but somewhere below, because people below, that sounds different, but people, they're just simply cooking food, like going from gastronomy to food, and showing people how they can work with it right outside their door, and how they can, saying if they have I was doing a course last night for a provider for cutlery and cooking gear for their customers, and I was just trying to encourage them to use the wild food that's right outside their door, and not to buy it from me and get it shipped around, because that's not about sustainability, and that's not about contact with the landscape. That's about the things that you're addressing with the attention of media and all that. So, but if you can show people how easy it is, and kind of maybe, and it will eventually, if I get success, it will ruin my business, but that's all right. And I also see myself more today as, the percentage of my business that's about foraging, and the percentage of my business that's about talking and walking and any kind of teaching is way bigger. That it's like that. I still do a lot of foraging, but I also do a lot of talking and walk. I think it's that the motor from the restaurant scene is still there, and you can use that to get attention. But you need to push harder, and you need to stand your ground. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm pretty sure that you'll stand your ground, and you will not be involved in anything that you don't feel comfortable with. But yeah, me too.
Well, I suppose the problem is, I do see that both you and I have been part of the thing that I'm critiquing here, not, because the thing is, I think what people need is an example of how to be back in, people bandied this phrase around, into the wild, which is based on a film and a book about some poor guy that went out into the wild not knowing what he was doing very well, and ended up being so hungry that he died. That's what that book's about, which is not a great association, but it's a very evocative phrase, into the wild. But the fact that people are talking about getting into the wild presupposes that we're out of it, right? We're actually, and I think what we're doing provides some answers to the question, how do we get back in? But so we want to be back into the biosphere, into a relationship with our surroundings and all of that. But ultimately, the only useful thing that we can do, I think, is to actually be an example of of being back in. You know, not a perfect example, but a work in progress example that gives a reference point for other people. And so that's about a space that we occupy. You know, my concern is with this sort of stuff that we're talking about, where it's about PR. Whenever PR is the driving force, it's going to be trying to create the impression that you're doing something because of the benefits that will come from broadcasting those images or that story or whatever, you know. Maybe I should not be so concerned about that and just let's get on with doing the genuine thing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I do. But what are we doing right now? I hope that we are encouraging people to think about what they're doing, but also to go out there and be part of it, right? Mm. And I always keep that perspective in whatever PR kind of thing I do. That's always my perspective. And I mean, it's very, if ever, with people who understands as much as you do. I mean, journalists, in general, they don't understand, and they I mean, really often I'm trying to, then you can do this, and you can, and I just say, hey, back off. I mean, you can ask me a question, and I'll answer it. You cannot tell me what to do because you don't understand. And you're a journalist. I'm the clever guy on this subject, so ask the question and I'll answer. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's an image, and that image of a forager, and that image has been created by the media and the restaurant scene. And I try to be me, or something that I believe in and can stand for, and not be that guy and that, you know, crazy wild guy. He just knows, you know. Do you know what I mean? I imagine you've been tried to be pulled into to be some sort of image of that as well quite a few times.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think I've managed to commit suicide on that front. You know, when so we had this long-standing battle with Natural England, which in spite of my best efforts to give our side of the story and see what crooks there'd been, and you know how actually it was the local nuclear power station that was destroying the environment, and we were just benignly picking some leaves that grew back. It just mud seems to stick. You know, we had a thing in the independent newspaper saying, you know, Natural England accuses foraging company of damage to the environment or whatever, and it just sticks. Even though the people quoted have since said, look, I didn't even say that to that journalist. They misquoted me. Mm-hmm. But it looks like we've lost the interest of a lot of media because of that sort of supposed sort of bad guy reputation that we took on the government conservation guys. So therefore we must actually be somehow the bad guys. So I haven't had so much media interest since then, which is probably a good thing, because it's always the same the same thing as you suggest there, that there's a caricature that gets reworked. But I suppose the thing is, what this all boils down to, and it also leads me to be a bit suspicious of another thing around the wild that's happening a lot in the UK. I don't know if it is in Denmark, but we've got there's multiple books come out that's like the new nature writing, it's called. And I kind of have the same issue with that as I do with all of this PR around restaurants, that it's all stuff that's basically working in people's mind and their imagination. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, I just think that it's going to be in the zone of fantasy, basically, an illusion, until people's actual bodies are starting to relate to their surroundings, you know. And so, you know, even with wild food,
what are these books about? Is that
amazing topic,
therapy kind of thing?
No, it'll be like, how does a forest work? How do how do flowers work? Or looking at the old ways, the way people used to live. So, you know, it's all great stuff that you'd want people to be thinking about. And perhaps it will edge people into, but I fear that what they're just going to do is give money to a conservation charity, buy more books, and watch more nature programs. You know, maybe they'll go and connect to the wild by sort of walking around and looking at the birds or something, which again is something that's great. But I just think what we need is an actual shift in our relationship to our surroundings. That's what we need. If all of this stuff is leading people in to be more likely to do that, fine. But I fear that it isn't. I fear that it is like a kind of voyeurism, you know, that we just think about, almost like pornography, that your internal drive that could cause you to have a really profound connection with another human being through sex, that ends up being something that never actually causes any real contact with people. And I mean, if I was to pursue that one a bit further, I guess, pornography ultimately probably doesn't enhance anybody's ability to profoundly connect with other human beings. There's something about it, whereas it's in that kind of imaginative realm, that fantasy realm, which actually is eating away at the core of your ability to deeply and profoundly connect. So, that might sound a bit of a drastic thing, but I think there's a problem with when we do something in the realm of the imagination. That bridge needs to be that gap needs to be bridged with people actually eating food and so on. And I have the same issue when I do foraging walks, that I think a lot of the people that come, it's just entertainment. They come to be inspired about this thing that they can then think about and be inspired about. Mm-hmm. So, and the buck stops with us. The ball's back in our lap here. I'm not trying to just. I'm kind of ranting. Invited you onto my podcast so I can rant at you. Honest. But
right.
Yeah, but it stops with us, like we say, well, how do we actually? Because to me, our job is to facilitate the rebonding of human beings with their places where they are. That's it. And I realize I'm not doing my job properly when all I'm doing is allowing my time to be used so that a chef can put stuff on his menu so that he can just seem to be more wild, more happening, more on trend, more. Do you know what I mean? I think, well, good grief. How did I manage to get tricked into doing this with my time? Or taking middle-class people from London out for the day to amuse them? How did I get tricked into doing that with my time? Because, I'm responsible to make good use of my time, that actually, at the end of the day, somebody can check it out and say, did you manage to help people rebond with their surroundings? And I'm like, oh, bugger. Actually, no, I help people to make money and be entertained. So, yeah, it comes back to us that we've got to do an inventory.
Each other for a while. And I know that sometimes I think that you carry a big burden on your shoulders. I agree that we should think like you, but I take middle-class people or whoever, kids, rich people, whatever, for walks. And I try to, I always get the feeling that they want to become me in half an hour, or 3 hours in an afternoon on a walk. But that's not possible. But you can inspire people, and I think that you can inspire people a lot as well. And just show them, and maybe put focus on it, like a few plants, and maybe that will be the opening door. Not pull off a show of, here you are with Miles Irving or Thomas Laursen, and see they know everything and be that show. I think it's better to get people close and make them taste it and relate to seasons and pick up a plant themselves, and maybe focus on a few plants instead of a whole shitload of plants, and just to show off. I used to be a little bit about the showing off because I like the attention, and I'm older and it's different. I think about my position and how to inspire people, and since I still believe that the restaurant business is a motor to pull and to push this change, then I think we should accept to be that guy. You can be that guy in England, and I can be it here in Denmark, that brings the wild plants, and maybe the chefs show off and pretend to be something which they're really not. But I think it's still worth the effort.
I just think we need to be able to bring the correction here somehow. At least try. That chefs need to be activists in this generation. That's their position is one of being highly influential on public opinion. Yeah. So to waste that opportunity on merely trying to get the accolades and extend your career and so on is really, really missing the point, because it's such an amazing opportunity. So I don't feel I can stand there and accept that, you know, like the PR thing is just a reality, and that's the way it's going to be. What if, you know, the chefs really dig down and say, no, look, I'm going to make, well, you know, Matt, who we had on the other week, is a great example for me. There's a chef who's 100%. He sees his role as to make things better, you know, to have that influence, which he credits to Thomas Keller. He said that's you got to look at your impact. That's what he says. So I think it's just like whose voice has been heard the loudest is the problem. And when it is just accepted that what a chef should do is chase the accolades, you know. You got to be in the 50 best. You got to have 3 Michelin stars. I think that thing has just got to be screwed up like a, you know, you started writing something and it was wrong. You screw that piece of paper up and throw it in the bin. It might have seemed like a good idea at the time, but the fact is that's a corrupting influence. When you do what you do to be seen and get accolades, you are corrupted. You are part of the system that you might think you're going to change by getting those accolades and having a big voice, but I'm afraid not. You are not going to change anything because you yourself are corrupted. And that's the point we've all got to get to. You know, we've got to get to the point where those temptations of fame and money, they don't pull us anymore. And I think, you know, until you've reached that point, you haven't reached that point. And until you have reached that point, you've got nothing to teach anyone. Actually, you're just going to make them as sick as you are. So anyway, I think it's great what you said there about just teaching a few plants, though, because that. Sorry, yeah, we're going to respond to that.
Yeah, well, I agree that Matt Orlando is the best example, maybe in the world, for that, being willing to put everything in there, and that, I mean, he's not my best customer anymore, fortunately, because he's too good at reusing and not throwing out. That's the trouble. Did you? I can't remember. I mean, I've sold him quite a lot of watercress, but now he grows the watercress because he used the stems with the root and he put that in his poly water system. So now he doesn't buy my watercress anymore. He's a farmer. So I've been talking to him and threatening him with putting on a Matt Orlando tax because he reused everything too much.
That's funny.
Yeah, but I mean, his restaurant. I mean, his food and his style and whatever he does, alongside the impact that I think that he's getting more and more impact in a lot of places. I mean, he's the most impressive chef right now, I would say, even though he's not as good business as he used to be. But that I'll live with that.
But the beauty is, why is he so impressive? Because he's not trying to impress.
Exactly.
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
But now everybody's got to say, oh, how could I try not to impress so I'll be more impressive? Sorry, it doesn't work like that.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, the more and more time thinking about, I mean, I'm a trained teacher. I've been working as a teacher, and I think I'm using.
Oh yeah, you didn't mention that. You didn't mention that in your intro. That's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I used to work as a teacher. I've been teaching kids both cooking and biology and lots of things, and I think more and more I'm reusing those skills or whatever you would call it, and I mean I try to go pretty close to people, like, I mean, even inside their intimacy sphere, not physically, but like I go close. So what can you do? So what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And then my focus is always the change. I mean, I can put away any of my own idiosyncrasies or beliefs. I mean, no, not all of my beliefs, because there is a goal, and that's of course based on my belief. But I can go for that, and I can look at that certain person and try to work with them. I mean, it's manipulation, or I'm trying to take them somewhere that they don't know. Maybe they don't want to go there, but I'm trying to, and I'll use whatever tools that I know to get to that point. And so I think I'm if I look upon my life from somewhere in the 90s and up, and then I've been like working with food, and then became a teacher, and then incorporating food and foraging in my teaching. I mean, I was teaching when I became a teacher in 2001. My final exam was a collaboration, was sort of a combination of cooking and biology, and I only used wild ingredients. Something that I caught or collected and picked and foraged from wherever. And I made a menu with that, and I tried to sort of articulate all the perspectives of how you can change the cooking in school. We have cooking in school in Denmark, and how you can have gardens in relation to the schools, and that could be part of the teaching. How we can incorporate, I mean, whatever, being it language or math or whatever. I mean, I'm working. That's a big thing in Danish schools, that you work with the topics on crossing. So you teach math with English and with cooking or with biology, sort of have a different perspectives on the teaching. And I mean, I haven't done all possible combinations, but more or less. And I think I use these things more and more in my work. And I think it's, I mean, wherever I have someone on a walk and I would give them stuff, and by now people trust me. I have an appearance apparently that people trust me. So if I hand them something says edible, they just eat it. And then I ask them afterwards often to pick it up themselves and eat it. And to a lot of people, that's like a physical and mental barrier to cross, to go down there on their knees to pick up a plant and eat it themselves. And I think whenever people have done that just once, they're open to more. I mean, and then if I more and more I try to do the walks with people where they live or where they're situated or where they work or whatever, depending on the setup, and not to go into the wild, but get it as close to where they are. Because I believe that that's how you can change people, because then they'll go back to that exact plant and pick a few leaves from that one, because that's more, that feels more comfortable than to re-finding that plant in another environment.
Yeah.
I all my walks these days, I start sit, and then I'll get down on my knees and I'll find whatever plants are right there, and I'll point out the trees and the bushes around in the distance. And sometimes that would be 25 plants, and we haven't left the parking spot yet.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we wouldn't forage often from that area, but I can point out all the wild plants in that area. And that kind of, the best way for me to describe it is that I take people to a place that they know, and then I change it. And now it's a different place. And then I think that they will be more motivated to meet that place or meet nature with more empathy and interest, and hopefully that will change their perspective on how they eat and buy and act in the whole world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see you thinking very carefully about how you do it, just so that it does actually do what you're setting out to do, i.e. change. Yeah. And I agree, like doing the few plants. I mean, I did a thing at a festival weekend before last. At one of my walks, I showed people 2 plants.
Wow. How did they respond to that?
Well, I just stood there and did nettles for half an hour. I mean, it was because nobody would join in almost. So we did eat a raw nettle, which meant squashing the nettle leaf and passing it around. And there were 40 people there at least. So I had to squash 40 nettle leaves. But it meant there was a lot of dialogue. You know, I was talking the whole time. It's partly why it took so long. But, you know, we talked about that nettle leaf that we were squashing and the hows and wherefores and whatever.
Yeah.
And then we moved on to nettle seeds.
Yeah.
And we spent ages on nettle seeds.
Yeah.
And then we went on to plantain, and we talked about what you could do with a plantain leaf, eating it, and what you could do with a plantain leaf as medicine. And we looked at the plantain seeds, and that was it. It was an hour long. It was just an hour. But we did 2 plants in an hour, because I thought, well, there's no way these people don't have plantain and nettles in their surroundings.
No.
And by the time I've finished, they will know 2 plants that they can pick from their surroundings. And I think for like everybody just needs to get started with one. I think if you were habitual about one, like nettles or plantain, that would get you started, and you're bound to learn another one.
I think that's how you should start. I mean, I people often say to me, "So I don't know anything about wild food." And I say, "Well, you know, berries, you know, wild apples. Do you know nettle? How about ground elder?" And they always, to all the, like, it's easy to go 5, maybe 10 plants that people feel comfortable and recognize. They say, well, it's all food. And I'll sort of take that plant and talk about all the things that you can do with it. I mean, instead of taking all the plants and do the same things with it, put it on the top of a piece of fried fish, then what can you do with nettle? Well, you can dry them, you can fry them, you can smoke them, you can grill them, you can ferment them. You can do so many things with them. Oh, and it has a seed too. Then we can go for that. I mean, then it's easy to stand there to talk half an hour about the nettles, because there are a lot of things to say about nettles, and everybody knows nettles. So it's a good perspective too. I mean, and nettles are abundant. I mean,
exactly. I just think you're stacking the odds. The more we can stack the odds in favour of those people actually getting to know the place that where they're living in this way of participating and actually eating something. That's just, yeah. I mean, I've started saying, listen, let me tell you what I want to get out of this. Yeah, I want you to be able to eat some stuff from near where you are tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And everything I'm saying is trying to make it more likely that when you go home, you're gonna be able to do that. Listen, Thomas, I wanted to bring back the conversation to where it started, because I'd love you to say a bit more about that ant story.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of fun. Could you tell everybody how you harvest the orange carpenter ant?
Yeah, I can. Well, ants are not just ants. An orange carpenter ant is a special ant that it has enzymes, so it can break down the inside of trees. So it makes a nest inside oak trees often, or willow, or different trees, always broadleaf trees, I would say. And then they have the nest in there, and then they have all the worker ants that keeps lice on the leaves, and they protect them against predators. And then
that's what we call those aphids, actually. Aphids.
Aphids. You use that word for it?
Aphids, or green fly and black fly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they collect the sugars from the butt of the did you say aphids?
Aphids, yeah.
Yeah, and bring it back into the nest. So I try to get the ants that are going back into the nest because they're sweeter, because they've collected all the sugars.
That's clever stuff.
So they taste different. And I mean, to begin with, the first time that I collected these ants, I didn't know about that. I thought they were like 2 generations, or big ants and small ants. I could just tell the difference. Some of them are bigger. You can actually see, I mean, literally, they can be almost twice the size.
And that's because they're swollen with this sweet stuff from the aphids.
Yeah, exactly. So they will taste sweeter, and you can see that their skeleton is sort of expanded, so they get sort of a white stripe, because they show off sort of the insides, so they look kind of a little bit different. So I collect them, and I use this old tool that's been used in biology teaching, which is like a vacuum machine that you suck on one end of a tube it goes into a small glass, closed glass, and then on the other, and you have a little piece of cloth to protect that you don't get dust and ants inside your.
So you don't breathe the ant in. Yeah,
exactly. So the other one doesn't have that cloth, and so that's sort of the vacuum tube that you use. You suck in one end, and then you put that tube towards the ants, and you suck them in. And I've tried reversing them, so I've had ants inside my lungs. That's probably you don't want that. I think I got them out. I might have one down there. I don't know. It's a few years ago. So, but actually, that's probably kind of dangerous. Anyway, so that's how I did, and I've been working on and talking a lot about using different sort of techniques or machines. I have one electric machine that sort of it's been made to collect spiders for people in their homes, and it kind of works, but it's really hard because you get a lot of dust in there, and you get, I mean, so it's easier to do it like the one by one version. I mean, they're kind of aggressive, so you can sometimes, if it's at a sunny day when they're really, so they are more active when they are warm.
Yeah.
So if you kind of annoy them a little bit and put your hand in there, they'll crawl on your hand, and then you can brush them off into a bucket or whatever. But I mean, yeah, I do that too. It depends on the spot. Depends on where they are. Sometimes you can find them in places near to humans when they walk on like cobblestones or something. Then they're easy to collect without. I mean, you can clean the area that they walk because they walk on the exact same path out and back. So you can collect them easier on like if they walk on a path or a pathway. So yeah, that's how I collect them.
Well, that's cool. I mean, this is making me think because so we have that species of ant in our garden at home.
Yeah.
But I don't know that much about it, and I've just learned something. I've always wondered where the nest was. So we've got a couple of trees. It must be in one or other of the trees, but one is.
What you do is you follow the big ones.
Yeah.
You see which way they're walking. You just follow them. They'll show you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they come all the way across the garden. So, but I assume now that so I wasn't sure I've seen them coming right across the garden. So they come to this big flower bed.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure whether they're coming to the flower bed because that's where the nest is, and then the other end of the garden is a tree. So you've answered that question.
Yeah. So I mean, the nest might be in your neighbor's garden. You never know.
I'll investigate.
Yeah. So I used to have them in my garden. That's where I found them. I used to believe that they were pretty not rare, but not easy to find. And now I know that now I'm quite good at finding them. I can find them. Not everywhere, but I found them in a lot of spots. So yeah. I know where to look. I mean, it's not one of the things I can spot from the highway yet, but I know the environment that they like, and I know which trees to go to. But it's basically like you need to go to the trees and look. Sometimes you can see them on the trees, but they can have the path on the backside of the tree, so you kind of need to walk around every tree when you look for them if you're in the right space. But of course you have them. I mean, they're probably, yeah. But it's a hard one to collect in quantities. But I would say you just need, I mean, to me it's a dessert ant, and you need just like 5-6 on each serving. That would make a huge impact. It's like having a little piece of orange zest on, and it really enhances flavor. And I really like them with berries. So orange carpenter and strawberries, that's a perfect combination.
Wow. I would, unless we're talking about a different ant, which I'm pretty sure we're on the same page. Don't they taste like coriander?
I've heard chefs saying that, but I would say they're orange peel, ginger, and lemon.
Okay.
Yeah, way more than coriander. But I've heard people saying that. But I mean, I to be honest, I don't really get the coriander.
Okay. Yeah. So what comes through to me, but I can see the connection with orange peel. That does make sense.
And I mean, you really want them to be eaten with something that has a little bit of water in it, because or else in your throat it kind of annoys a little bit back. But as long as you're eating with something that contains water, it's nice. It doesn't come. But if you're out there and collecting them and you eat a few, you can get it. I mean, it's not bad, but just a slight irritation back in your throat.
I've never really, the wood ants. I've stood there and really gorged on them, but these ones I've only ever sort of taken a couple, but we see them all the time in the summer. And here's the thing, like. I mentioned just now that they go between these trees and the flower bed at the other side of the garden.
Yeah.
Well, last year we just happened to have a hose that was left running across the garden. Well, the ants soon figured that one out, and they used it as their highway.
Yeah.
It's easier than climbing up and down blades of grass to get across the lawn. So they were just trekking up and down this pipe, and we actually made a short YouTube video about it and called it the ant highway. It's quite fun.
That would be a good trick to get them.
Well, it's only listening to you has made me think of that. But what we should do is lift the pipe up and shake them off. But
I have down, and they're probably going to walk on it again.
Yeah, because they'll put their pheromone trail down, won't they?
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's a good. I'm learning too. I'm getting inspired because they're clever animals. They would like. I mean, just imagine a forest bed, walking and being an ant and having to walk 50 meters.
Yeah,
that's like. I mean, it'd be easier for me to get to you. I mean,
because every inch you've got to climb up and down a leaf or a stone or something like that.
Yeah.
5 times the distance once you've got up
like
and
down. A spruce forest after a storm with all the trees falling down, and then you have to cross 5 kilometers, like up and down and under. And I mean, even with dangers of things falling down or not being solid,
but they're just
crazy.
They just crack on regardless. So yeah, maybe we need to be more like an ant too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Oh, I'm looking forward to hear about how you work out with the ants. I'm not sure I have any in my garden currently. Last summer I had some, but then I think they changed their path. They tend to do that. I've seen that before. They might, because then maybe there's like a plum tree with a lot of sugars in it, and then I'm not sure if they move their cattle, so to speak, but they change the paths from time to time. I tried to move an entire nest once, and I found them a nice place, and I dug it up and tried to get the queen, and I dug up maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 20,000 ants, put it into a wheelbarrow, and I ran 400 meters to another place, and I put it there, and they were there for 3 weeks, and then they ran away. Yeah, so I didn't mind. But apparently it's possible to move. I know a guy who works with ants on a scientific level, and he's managed to work, but that would be the Formica rufa, the red wood ant.
That's what we work with more. We call that wood ant. And
yeah. So apparently they're possible to move, because he's trying to work with them as for pest control, and because they're pretty good to keep, instead of whatever pesticides they would be using, then they use this, and it's in an apple yard, and apparently it's I think it's working, but it's work in progress and test. I don't know. I'm not sure if they have their final results yet, but they're working on it.
If you have anything about that they've put online, it'd be good to have that for the show notes, as it were.
Check it out. Yeah, I need to speak him on another note in a week or so. So I'll ask him how it's going.
But I mean, I just think this is an example. I mean, I know there's vegans out there, and I personally know vegans who are pretty upset with me that we harvest and sell ants. But and I guess you have to respect that position of wanting to do no harm. But just this conversation shows that you and I have engaged with the wonderful world of ants purely because we've got more involved on the basis of having a restaurant that wanted to buy them, and I think that's a really important thing. That the commercialization of something, much as I've kind of aired what I feel the frustrations and the downside of that are. The fact is that when human culture engages with something, whether it's through commercialization or just people's private interest, all of a sudden we're back in. You and I are paying attention, we're learning, and we probably, in the long run, will have perspectives on ants that even the entomologists, the professional ant guys, wouldn't have noticed that, because they'll have a particular project. They won't necessarily be revisiting orange carpenter ants year after year after year after year.
No.
In the way that you are when you're harvesting them. So I think, that's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked for ages, so I know we could
Yep.
carry on talking for ages, but probably our listeners will draw the line at a 3-hour podcast. So I
Yeah.
don't know. We're building them up to it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's been nice talking to you. Always inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really good, Thomas. It's really good to catch up and chew the fat.
You're always welcome here. Anytime I'll show you ant tricks or whatever, and probably I'll learn a thing or two or 5 or more from you. Yeah. It's been nice catching up.
Thanks for being with us.
Anytime.
Thank you for joining us for this week's World Wild podcast. And I'd just like to point you to the show notes. Perhaps some of you that are coming in through Apple Podcast or any of these other providers might not yet be aware, but you can go to forager.org.uk/podcast. And there's also a link to a blog I did to explain when we launched the podcast. It's pretty good for people to see that if you want to hear a bit more background. And as I said last week, do please get in touch if you'd like to share any thoughts spurred by what you've heard, or you've got any comments, or you just want to say hello and let us know where you are and why you're interested in what we're doing. We'd love to have a sense. At some point, I guess we'll start some kind of community page that will provide a way for people that are listening to interact. That would be nice. Okay, so that's it for this week's World Wild podcast.